You guys are playing around this thing. You actually just want state-owned companies of everything. And this is like because this is how I'm reading it.
The state must be at the center of all development.
All the multinationals ultimately must run away.
No,
and
that's
everything
not our
must
intention.
be run by the state.
Those who are not interested in being guided in terms of their business in South Africa, it's up to them whether they stay or go. But we must have our state capacity, and we are not saying the private sector must go away. We welcome private sector involvement, we welcome private sector participation in South Africa. But because this private sector participation is going to be guided by the state and possibly harm your profit margins, you're going to run away. Not that your profit margins are going to make you poor. You're still going to be rich as hell, but you're not as rich as you could be because of regulation. You're not going to run away. And I think it's a myth. A lot of people said they're going to leave South Africa after 1994. A lot of people keep saying they're going to leave South Africa and not invest anymore because of BEE.
Yes.
It's not happening. It's a myth that
There's a reason why they
invest.
do that, by the way.
Yeah, what is the reason?
Well, depending on who you ask, if it's idiotic people at the bottom, it's because they bought into media propaganda.
Yeah.
If it's people at the top, they're trying to control certain aspects of the markets
It's a
and the
threat.
messaging for... No, part of it is to maybe devalue the rand or to short certain stocks and then resell.
Yeah.
It's part of the game.
Yeah.
I think it's what happened with the Rothschilds between Britain and France, where they were sending mixed messaging and then buying up assets for a steal.
So we have to control that game. We can't become subjects of it.
Can I read between the lines or must we just let it go?
You can do anything.
So at 1:30. My apologies. Okay. I'll try and shut it down. Thank you for that. We don't need to go into this. I'll let people read between the lines, but I have an understanding of why certain white people, certain well-off people, certain international people have issues, even after you've explained it as nicely as you've explained it, because they're reading between the lines what I'm sort of reading between the lines, and it doesn't sound like an ideal situation for them and their profit maximization agenda.
It wouldn't. When we don't exist, a state shouldn't exist for the profit maximization of anyone. Everyone must be able, that's exactly what we were talking about earlier about socialism. Everyone must be able to sustain themselves. The problem of profit maximization is greed. Just because the state regulates you and tells you to do some certain levels of local beneficiation, stop making us an export-orientated country, doesn't mean you're going to go poor. But greed motivates you to threaten to run away or to run away because you're not making as much as you could be, but you're making enough.
In the interest of time, because we don't have you for that much longer, 2 questions. You can go on these for, I think we've got 12 minutes.
Yeah.
I still need you to clarify the open border policy. Many people said they wouldn't vote for the EFF based on that last year, and it seems there was miscommunication. And then your thoughts on, and your opinion on why you think Floyd Shibambu left, Advocate Dalimpofu left, and if you have anything to say around just the stories around Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. Yeah, those will be my closing.
I'm not sure why there's a consistent misunderstanding of the EFF's open border policy, because fundamentally at the root of it is that we want to promote intercontinental trade, intercontinental development, ensuring that we develop an African economy where there's collaboration in building mutual infrastructure and beneficial relationships. But also there must be open travel across the continent, not necessarily undocumented.
Sure.
So
the EFF believes in documentation.
We do believe in documentation. There's no other way you're going to run a stable society. No one can just come and go anywhere. I mean, to get on a flight, I have to produce an ID now. We believe in documentation. We subscribe to it.
You also believe in borders.
We don't believe in borders.
At all?
We don't believe in borders at all.
When you speak about easy travel, would there be a border or is it in another mechanism?
Look, the fact of easy travel is that we must be able to travel and trace each other's existence in any country that you go to.
Okay.
But borders are created for colonial purposes. So just to say that there must be ease of movement doesn't mean you believe in borders between certain places. I mean, there's geographical locations that are established now as a result of borders.
Yeah.
But we're saying there mustn't be a hindrance to trade. There mustn't be a hindrance to interactions across the continent. There mustn't be taxation of trade between Botswana and South Africa because it hinders our economic development that is mutually beneficial. The misconception about us saying that we just want everyone and undocumented to come here comes from a declaration that people must find creative ways into South Africa during COVID-19. Now, the people we were specifically speaking about is those who had left South Africa before the lockdown and then were told that they can't come back when the lockdown regulations had been lifted.
That was the context.
That was the context of that declaration.
Okay.
There are people who are documented, who reside in South Africa, who have children in South Africa, who have children who go to school in South Africa, who are not being allowed to return to South Africa post-lockdown regulations. And we're like, but what does that even mean? These people's lives are here. Their properties are here. Their kids are here. Their entire livelihood is here. And you're saying they can't come back. So that is the context in which that
And
was
you guys
said.
said find creative ways.
Find
now.
creative ways to come in because you are from here. You're basically here. You're someone who's recognized legally to be here.
Yeah.
So that was the misconception around that, and it's something that has been running for years now. But we want there to be ease of travel within Africa as a continent so that we can build mutually beneficial economic and trade, political and cultural relationships. And that doesn't necessarily mean you mustn't be documented. And it's going to be a progressive realization for us to do that. It's not going to be immediate. We're not going to click our fingers and say, we're all united. And South Africa is not the destination for the unity. That's another thing. South Africa becomes the destination for the unity because we're not cooperating as African countries. Other African countries are in conflict. We see what's happening with the DRC now. Other African countries are living in starvation and poverty. Other African countries are living through sanctions. And there's no cooperation in Africa to think about what are we going to do about what's going to happen with Ethiopia because they're going through a drought. But because of the restrictions that exist due to borders, because of the restrictions that exist due to trade that we've imposed amongst ourselves, interventions become difficult, they become bogged down by red tape. So there's no economic growth that's going to happen in Africa if South Africa remains the only sort of viable economy in Africa next to Nigeria, as an example.
Sure.
We must develop together. Otherwise, South Africa is going to continue to have an immigration problem because we're the only place that resembles peace and economic prosperity. So if we really want to fix the immigration problem, this is a method and mechanism.
From a visual perspective, for people to understand, does the EFF envision an Africa that looks like South Africa now, where different countries are like different provinces?
That's a way to look into it. I think maybe the better example is Europe. Europe operates with the euro as a currency, or do they still? I'm not sure. No,
yes, the euro.
They still do. Yeah, the euro still is the operating currency in Europe. To travel between countries in Europe, you can get onto a train, and as long as you produce your visa, you're fine.
But they have borders.
Those borders are not. So there's a philosophical and historical symbolism to the borders that we're talking about.
I'm just asking if you envision borders like theirs, or would you remove them like the borders around our provinces?
But there's no borders to remove. That's another thing. So borders are lines on a map. So that's another thing that we need to emphasize. We have border gates. But if you drive 10 kilometers away from a border gate, there's no border. There's no real border. This is a symbolic or philosophical declaration, and that we try to enforce but fail to enforce because people cross over these fences we call borders all the time. There's no real border. There's a country that's identifiable as a sovereign territory, but there's no real border between South Africa and Lesotho. It's a sovereign territory. We're a sovereign territory, but travel is restricted and people are criminalized by crossing across these sovereign territories because we say there's a border.
But the fences you'd want removed.
There's no fence.
Where there are fences.
If you can go to if you go to Bloemfontein now and want to go to Lesotho, you'll find there's a gate, but there's no fence around it. I'm trying to say to you, it's in our imagination and it's instilled upon us because it was a declaration of the 1844 Berlin Conference. There's no real border. We criminalize people for crossing the lines that are drawn on maps.
I'm trying to figure out, I understand what you're saying about the symbolic and philosophical. Where there are border gates, where there may be a fence, do you guys envision removing them? Like our
don't
provinces?
Have to remove them. It can be a place. Yeah, no, we won't remove them. It's a place. It's a place of checking. So if you're coming into South Africa, it's a tracking purpose. So you can't be in another sovereign territory without anyone knowing that you're there. That's all we're saying.
It sounds like you still believe in borders to me.
No, it doesn't. Because as citizens in South Africa, all of us have to produce an ID if we're identified by a police officer. If you're stopped in your car, you have to produce your license.
So we can have documentation that's Africa-wide.
Yes, that's exactly
which applies to all of us.
Must apply to all of us.
That you're from this region, you're from the Eastern Cape. Your ID shows
this is where I'm from.
You're from the Eastern Cape, but you can easily come to Joburg.
In and out. Don't have to apply for a visa. Don't have to go through a long process.
But you still want some territorial demarcation.
It's not for purposes of territory. It's for purposes of knowing how many people are in your country and who's in your country.
Some type of border. Some type of territorial
If you want to be
fencing.
hung up on it, you can be hung up on it. But
I'm just trying to figure out, because I was trying to use South Africa as an example of when you leave KwaZulu-Natal to get into the Free State, you don't see any fence, there's no border gate, there's no showing any ID. I was wondering if you guys see Africa like that, or if you see it in another way where, no, there are still some type of fencing and gates. It's just a matter of it's easy. You don't have to pay anything and apply for anything.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're saying. That's exactly what we're saying. You must be able to access South Africa through producing of identification, and that is it.
Okay.